continue on throughout the school year. And so the first part of the class, all of you who are in both our junior high and our senior high program were all together for the first 5 weeks. Did everybody get that? And then after we finish this portion, some of you will be continuing with our Light Bearers program, and some of you will continue on. For those of you who are watching by video, we are so excited about this class because I really believe that when we get done with it, we are truly going to have a greater understanding about how to stand strong for Jesus in this generation. How many of you think that's a good idea? You guys feeling some pressure in other words, to stand in your faith? So what we want to do is come up with some practical how-tos, and we're going to start by building a foundation. What book have we been reading now for the last few weeks? What's it called? Not Open. How many of you have a copy of your Not Open book? Got it with you right here? We'll be in this book for the first 5 weeks of our class, and what you will be doing is following along in your syllabus and reading the section that I have you to read. So what chapters were we to read before we got to this class today? Who can tell me? 1 through 5. Chapters 1 through 5. How many of you got that done? Let's see your hand. Did I have that done? Oh, good. Some of you may still be reading it, and you can catch up with us. But next week, what chapters are you supposed to read? 6 through 11. Chapter 6 through 11. It's a pretty quick read, so you'll need to go ahead and get going on that, because what we'll do in the class now is we're going to talk about some of the high points of what we learned in the first few chapters. Now, this is a rather different kind of a class, because obviously I'm the one that wrote the book. So you're reading my original writings in here. Who wrote the book with me? Besides me, who else wrote this book? Lucas. And how many of you know Lucas? You guys know Lucas? How old is Lucas? Do you know? He's 23, going on 24, and so when he writes in the book, he's writing from the perspective of somebody who's responding from somebody in your generation. So the way we wrote the book is I would write a section, and then he would read it, and then he would write his reflections back as to, okay, here's what I think this means for me in this generation. So I'm expecting you guys to read this book with the same kind of a focus. When you read my part, then I want you to be thinking, if I was writing Lucas's part, what would I say? Okay? What would I say about the content in here? So let's get started with the first chapter. First of all, now you guys know me probably better than some of you ever knew me before by reading the first chapter. Do you have your books with you? Go ahead and open it if you'd like to. What's the title of the first chapter in the book?
Something is wrong.
Something is wrong. Something is wrong. Do you think that's true? Is there something wrong going on in our world today? What do you think? Yes? How many of you vote yes? There's something wrong going on in the world today. All right, well, what's going on that's wrong? What do you think is going on that's wrong? You have to say it loud. What's going on that's wrong?
Just anything?
Anything.
Everything.
Everything, okay? We have challenges with homosexuality and the questions that's bringing to the church. What other kind of things are going on that you've noticed?
Drugs?
Drugs.
Alcohol?
Alcohol, you're getting all the substances in here? Yeah. We're seeing all kinds of problems where you'd say of people trying to cope with the world going kind of crazy. All right, in the first chapter, I want you to go over to page 6. We have this kind of an amazing statistic in here, and I want to talk about it. If you go to page 6, you're going to find this box that says 1%. 1%. But those of you who have maybe read the book or you've even heard us talking about the statistic, if you go and you look across America today and you ask them, you just go and you ask people, are you a Christian? Or if we just went through a crowd like this and we passed out some sort of a flyer and we said, mark your religion of preference. And according to what the statistics are in this book, how many people would say in America that they are Christian today? What's it say? 83%. 83% will still say they are Christian. Now, what do you think, guys? Does it seem like 83% of Americans are living a Christian lifestyle right now? Or where you could just walk up and say, okay, I can tell you're a follower of Jesus Christ. Does that seem like that's what's going on?
No.
No, it doesn't. And so that makes us need to go and ask some deeper questions. Now, we talked about some of the things in the first part of the book that are going wrong in America. Right now, you can pretty well go to the news almost any day, and you can see things that are happening that just make you say, what is going on here? Things like, I just saw sometime last week, a new study that says of Christian men, these are people who if you just passed out a form, and you ask them, do you ever look at pornography? If you were just going to guess, just somebody study how many Christian men look at pornography. How many do you think of the Christian America said, I never look at pornography?
Not enough.
Okay, what do you think? Anybody know? In the study, they found like 5%. 5% who said they never looked at pornography. I just want to throw my book down. I mean, it's like, what are you talking about? What is going on here? It's just crazy. So you see that somehow what we've had going on in America right now is people getting an idea of Christianity in their head, but yet then when you talk about their behavior or how they make their decisions, it's not the same thing. So let's look at the statistic. 83%, see where the marker is here, 83% say in America that they're Christian. Okay, do you think that that is what you would call true? Are they truly Orthodox, Bible-believing, living for Jesus, sold out, born-again Christians, whatever words you want to use? What do you think?
No.
Well, it's not making sense to me, okay? So look back at your statistic in here. What does it say next? It says that 83% say they're a Christian, but only 9% of adults, 9% of adults. How many people do we have here on the front row in this room? Looks like we have 9, right across here. 9 people in this room. So if you have a statistical of the people here in this front row, about how many of you would be having a biblical worldview? If you had a group of 10 people, we're going to do this roughly 1. Roughly 1 out of 10 have something called a biblical worldview. So 9% of adults have a biblical worldview. Now, let's take it down, though, and look in your generation. In this book, we talk your generation. What do we call your generation? The millennials. Have you ever heard that phrase before? You know, people who do study things going on in history, they name generations. Maybe you've heard of the baby boomer generation. There's all these different generations. But the generation that you guys live in are the millennial generation. Some people can give it a different name. Maybe you've heard it called the Mosaic generation. Same thing. In your generation, what percentage of you have a biblical worldview? 1%. Okay, 1%. Somebody who's a real math whiz in here, what does that mean? What does 1% mean? 1 out of 100 have something called a biblical worldview. So what do you think? Some of you guys participate maybe in public school sports, or you're a little bit older and you've kind of been out to see maybe broad groups of people in America. Do you think that could be right? What do you think? You think so? Mm-hmm. You think so? What do you think? 1%. Well, I saw this study in a book, and I have to tell you, when I first saw it, I said, something must be wrong with the researcher here. This can't possibly be right. I am sure that there are more than 1% of this young generation who have either gone to Sunday school, made a decision for Jesus, gone to youth group, right? 1%. They've been in Christian schools or they've been homeschooled. You know, I know there's more than 1%. Do you know about how many people, for instance, in this group, this is coming from a homeschool co-op. Do you know about how many people in America homeschool? Do you know what percentage of students in America homeschool today? Do you know?
It used to be like a million.
Used to be about 1 million. I think the statistic now is that there's about a 3% in America that are homeschooling. Now, not all homeschoolers are Christians, but, you know, if you also take the other people who are in private school, private Christian school in America, can you see where I'm going with this? Are there more than 1% who are getting a significant amount of Bible training and talk about God in their life? Would you say? 1%. Now, how old are millennials? Do you know? Did you look in the book? About what age are we talking about if we talk about a millennial? Anybody who is basically right now on the earth that's between the ages of 10 and 30. Between the ages of 10 and 30. So how many in here are about 12? 12-year-old, 13, let's see, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, okay? Everybody in the student section here, I guess that the other parents and adults in the room, we probably are not millennials, right? We're a little bit past the millennial generation. But yet Nathan, who's in the back of the room doing the videotaping, how old are you?
30.
30. Okay, so we're talking about all the people in here from roughly the youngest in this room up to Nathan's age. In that generation, only 1% have a biblical worldview. Now, that is an astounding thing, because how many of you, at least at this point in your life, here's one of my goals for you in this class. I know that you guys have been to Sunday school. How many of you have been to Sunday school? Quite a bit of your life. How many of you have been to church? Quite a bit of your life. How many of you have been to Bible studies? Quite a bit of your life. How many of you have been to youth groups and youth events and concerts and all these things? Quite a bit of your life. You know, that's good because we're helping you God is. But by the time we get to the end of this class, here's the question I want you to be able to answer for yourself. Do you intend to live not just as a go-to-church sort of Christian, but do you intend to live as an authentic Christ follower in a culture where you will be in the extreme minority because you're going to make decisions using your Bible? Are you personally going to do that? Now let me ask you, if I told you, Danae, what if I told you that we're going to put you on a plane like about 6 months from now, we're going to put you on a plane and we are going to move you to a country over in Asia where 99% of the people there will not be Christians. Okay? And we want you to live there, and we want you to grow a family there. You're going to need to, you need to finish your education, and you're going to be settling into that country. Okay? Now just think about that. What would that be like? What would that be like? Danae, what do you think that would be like?
Different.
Be very different. Okay? Would you be frightened by that?
Probably.
Boy, I would. What do you guys think? Would you be a little bit afraid of that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what would be some of the concerns you might have if you go to live in a country where 99% of the people are not going to be followers of Jesus? What are some of the first thoughts that hit your mind?
Persecution.
Persecution?
It'd be pretty hard to find a good church.
Hard to find a good church? Boy, it might be really, really hard to find a good church because you'll be looking for a very small group of people that might be hiding out someplace. Persecution could be really tough. It would be difficult because people would be making lifestyle decisions that would be very different from yours, right? And so people would look at you and they'd say, what? You're weird, right? You're just weird. What are you doing over here? What are you doing like that? That's not how we do things around here. Can you see that really, and when we look at some of the statistics that are also in the book about what's happening in your generation, how many of you have known some people in your generation that have fallen away from Jesus already? And they're pretty young, but they've already fallen away from Jesus. Can I see your hands? How many of you know some people that maybe you went to Christian school with them, and you're looking at it, and as they launch out and they go to college, then all of a sudden you find out, they're living with their boyfriend or girlfriend, or they're running around, they're not really going to church, and you're looking at it saying, wait a minute, I thought we were all going to serve Jesus together. Statistically, that is happening. In fact, some studies say about 80% of young people, when they move out of their house, wherever they were raised, they get out on their own, they aren't continuing to follow in the ways of Christianity or Orthodox Christianity. And so you look at yourself saying, well, what happened there? So let's look over here. Go to the back of the book, because one of the thoughts I had when I found that statistic is, well, maybe what they've done is they've just identified that a biblical worldview is some list of rules that's really not very important. Okay? Just kind of a minor little list that you don't need to be concerned about. But let's look. We're on page 242. You see that back there? And it has a list of the 6 points that the Barna Research Group used to define a biblical worldview. You see that right now? You see that? All right, let's read them together, and let's figure out whether we think these things are important. Point number 1, absolute moral truth exists. What does that mean? What does that mean?
There's a right and wrong for everything.
There's a right and wrong for everything, okay? That you can find an absolute truth in every situation. What do you guys think? Is that an important thing?
Yes.
Well, think about this. Jesus came and he said what? I am the way, the truth, and the life. Well, if he comes and he says, I am truth, he's saying that there's an absolute that you can define me as, correct? But we're living in a generation right now where that first statement could be kind of tricky, that absolute moral truth exists. So let's talk about that in just a minute. Let's go to the second one. The Bible is totally accurate in all of the principles it teaches. Okay? That's the second one. Number 3. What's it say? Somebody read that one for us. Who's it talking about? Number 3.
Satan.
Satan is a real being or force, not merely symbolic. Kind of like watching Star Wars or something like that, where it's an idea, but it's not really something literal. Okay, number 4. People cannot earn their way into heaven by doing good deeds or being good. And number 5, Jesus lived a sinless life on the earth. Number 6, God is the all-knowing, all-powerful creator of the world, and he still rules the universe today. So those are the 6 points. How many of you think that in your time that you've spent in church, and I know where some of you, guys have been trained, how many of you say those 6 points seem to be pretty, normal to me? Would you say those seem to be pretty normal? Okay. Now, I also know some of us in this room, we go to different churches and we have some things that we might believe differently on. So look at this list. Does it say anything in there about baptism? How you're supposed to be baptized? Okay. Does it say anything in here like about, what's another thing that churches might be different in America, particularly in the American church?
Speaking
The Holy Spirit, speaking in tongues, maybe something about the role of women, or something about communion, whether we're going to use grape juice or whether we're going to use wine. All these things that different churches might have different beliefs on. But do you see any of those on that list there? Do you see any on those lists? Did you know that these lists right here, how many of you studied anything about church history? Church history? Would you say that these have been the standard of the church for the entire time of 2,000 years of church history? What do you think? Yeah. In fact, if you were going to define what we call orthodox, authentic biblical Christianity, these 6 statements would be pretty important. So let's just try a minute and see what's going to happen. Because if only 1% of the people in your generation believe all 6 of these, Micah, what would happen if maybe somebody just believed a little bit different on number 2? Number 2, what's going to happen? The Bible is totally accurate in all of the principles it teaches. Okay, now what if somebody they just said, I believe the Bible is accurate in most of the principles it teaches. What's going to happen? Trace that out for me. What's going to happen in their life?
They won't be able to truly believe the next 4 things on this list.
Okay, so it's automatically going to shake around the other things on the list. That's true. What else is going to happen for them personally as a person? The Bible is totally accurate in all the principles it teaches.
Well, with that, they would start questioning the Bible, and they would start excluding parts bit by bit.
They would start doing that. Did you read that? That's what happened to me in my life. You read my story in the first part of there. See, that's the way I grew up. I grew up with kind of a concept that the Bible is a very, 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 very important book. Okay, I never doubted that. Never doubted that this book was really important. But what I thought is that you really couldn't believe it all because some of it was not accurate for our times anymore. And so what I did is I kind of took it as my personal job to figure out which parts were in and which parts were out. And so then I went to school, and you read my story about going to seminary, and we did that a lot there. We did a lot, trying to figure out which parts we thought were accurate and which parts weren't. Well, can you see how that's going to get some very odd conclusions? In fact, we'll talk in this class about what's happening with a lot of people who are doing that today. And that's why people are falling away and doing all kinds of crazy things. Let me ask you, does the Bible say anything about marriage? Okay? How does it define marriage? Where would you look in the Bible to define marriage? Genesis?
Corinthians.
Corinthians, okay? And any time in the Bible, how is marriage defined? What is marriage in the Bible?
One man, one woman.
One man, one woman joined together that let no man put it asunder. Okay, so I'm kind of taking all those scriptures and putting them together. Okay, well, what if today I was a Christian, so I went to church and I was one of those 83%. Okay, it's one of the 83%, but I didn't believe point number 2. So whenever there's new ideas that came along that says, well, really, marriage can be between 2 men or 2 women, and in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, yeah, that could be right, because really the Bible's not accurate in all that it teaches, so that's just probably an idea that's changed. You see the danger here? Now, I need to show you that's exactly what's happening in your generation. All right, you see how that works? Let's try this one. How about number 5? Jesus lived a sinless life. Jesus lived a sinless life. What's the big deal about that one?
Because if he didn't live a sinless life, then his sacrifice wouldn't have paid for all of our sins.
Okay, so if he didn't live a sinless life, then when he died on the cross, he was just being punished for the sin that he committed. And so that kind of wipes out what? Kind of the whole gospel message, or the whole salvation message just goes crazy at that point, right? So if he didn't live a sinless life, that's a real problem if we want to make it to heaven. What else is the problem of that? If you say, did you know that almost 50% of American adults don't think he lived a sinless life? They think that he kind of was a really, really, really good teacher picture, but he had some mistakes that he made and some sins, like we would think of missing the mark of God's plan. So whenever you think of God that way, what's the other effect that it can have?
He's not perfect.
He's not perfect. We kind of reduce him down to our level. Okay, have you ever been to a sports game and you had everybody who suddenly wanted to get together and pray before the game? You ever had that happen? Or have you ever been to a sport event and you watched people and they were wearing a cross necklace on the day of their race or the day of the game? You ever seen that happen? Have you ever seen people who go to a hospital? Somebody's sick and suddenly they're having prayer meetings at the hospital, and in your mind you're thinking it's good that they're praying. You don't want to say that's bad, but you're looking at it saying, now wait a minute, we didn't really think that you had much interaction with God. You see, what can happen is if we lose that he's sinless, then we reduce God down to our level and he becomes kind of a buddy, kind of a friend. Now, it's true that we want God to be our best friend. That's exactly true. But if we have a situation where we're thinking that he's just kind of like us, then what's going to happen in that case, Micah?
Well, then we're going to think of him as us, and we're not going to respect him the same way.
We're not going to respect him. We're going to lose the fear of the Lord. Okay, let's look at one more of these. How about this one? People cannot earn their way into heaven by trying to be good or doing good works. Okay, is that a problem if people don't believe that one?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Now, what I'm trying to get you guys to see is that in your generation, if you were going to go out and find the people who are going to make decisions and they're going to figure out how to do life, if they don't believe these 6 things and you do, is that going to make a difference in how you live your life? Are you going to look odd to them?
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Are you going to feel the pressure of that?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's go on here now. That's what we were talking about. There's something terribly wrong. If you haven't read in here, I gave you this other thing that you can look at. Go over here to page, find that chart where it has the page with a lot of the problems, the stats of a dangerous cliff. We have a lot of problems. What page is that on? Page 18. We can look at it and say things have changed in our culture related to divorce, related to, people mentioned drugs, alcohol, pornography, related to things like living together before marriage. You know, when I was a kid and we found out that somebody was living with somebody else, and some of you are a little older in the room, what did we call that?
Cohabitation.
We didn't have a nice word like cohabitation. What did we call it?
Shacking up.
Shacking up.
Yeah.
Shacking up. That's what we called it.
That's
And it was very derogatory, like somebody was really doing something bad. But look over here at one of the statistics in here. By age 30, 74% of women have lived together outside of marriage with another person, maybe a woman or a man. And so now we can see how things have shifted around in our culture. How many of you have known people who have lived together before marriage? Okay, how many of you have been invited to weddings, and the people have been living together for a while? And so, you know, we're rewriting our culture with this one fact, that we haven't chosen to realize that the Bible says what about that? Don't. That's a good way of saying it. Don't do it. What kind of sin would it be called in the Bible?
Adultery.
Adultery. Okay, but see, remember, in this generation, we don't think the Bible is accurate in all principles, so we can just take that out. Point number 2 there, we just kind of take that out. All right, so the reason why this is such a big deal is, honestly, what we've got going on right now is an invisible spiritual culture war. Where did we get that? Subtitle of the book. An invisible spiritual culture war. What do I mean by that? When I say the word invisible, what do you think of?
Spirit.
You can't see it. Now, we all know that people have thought that a lot of things were really invisible, when really you can get a microscope out and you can see them. So I want you to think about this word invisible in this way. Invisible means you can only see what's going on here if you have the tools to see it. If you have the right tool. Okay? Invisible, and when I think about this, if you think of a war, when you think of a war, what do you think of? What do you think of when you say war?
Like guns.
Guns,
Blood.
blood, fighting,
Casualties.
tanks, prisoners of war, MIA. What's the word MIA mean? Missing in action. Okay, you think of a war, you think of somebody who is going to be in a conflict state. So let me ask you, in America today, does there seem to be a war state going on in our culture?
Mhm.
Certainly among those of us who can see that there's light and dark. So what we have here is an invisible spiritual. You know, if you go and you listen to even places on the news like MSNBC, do you guys ever watch the news?
Yeah.
Do you ever watch the news? Do you ever read any of the news online? Get any kind of newspapers? Hear about any of the current events maybe with your mom and dad? Some of you are shaking your head yes, some of you are shaking your head no. You know, there was a season in my life where I just really wasn't very interested in what was going on in the world because I figured let's just leave that to somebody else. They can go figure that out for us and then tell me about it later. But the problem is, if you guys don't know how to understand what's going on in the world, if you don't know how to listen to the news and make sense of it, you might accidentally think you're living in peacetime. You know what I mean? Because everything's going on pretty good in your world. Everything's feeling pretty comfortable because you know what's going on among your brothers and sisters and you ate dinner and all that stuff's going okay for you. But really what we need to help you to understand is you are living in the middle of an invisible spiritual culture war. What's the real war going on? Where's the real war going on?
In heaven.
In the heavens. It's a conflict between light and dark. It's a conflict between God and the forces of everything of heaven and Satan and the forces of darkness. But you know, when you get up in the morning, did you see like maybe some sort of devil figure knocking on the front door of your house and saying, excuse me, I'd like to come on in here and give you confusion. I'd like to come and hurt you, right? I mean, you can't see these things. You can't see it. Now, in the scriptures it says we're not wrestling against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities. So, you know, even when you go and you read the news and you're tempted to say, oh, these are bad people over here. They are doing bad things. How does God see people?
Good.
He sees them as his created being. He's calling to everybody. And so he can't identify everything in them as good unless he sees them through the blood of Jesus Christ because they're born again. But he's heartbroken. He sees people, he wants to come to him. And so, you know, there's a real pull going on that we want to look around us and try to figure out what's going on. But the problem is we're in the middle of a culture war. So here we are, we're in the middle of an invisible, spiritual culture war. What's culture?
It's like
The way of life.
Way of life? Okay. What are some of the things that are in culture? Just name some of the things.
music,
Music,
TV shows,
media, all the media stuff, style, fashion, even what you learn in your education system. How many of you plan on going to college? Okay, plan on doing something past high school, some kind of level of training. Okay, there's cultural styles even in the education world. So everything that we do as a group of people together that kind of define us is our culture. And so what we've got going on right now is, you know, your parents are home trying to get you into a certain culture. What culture are they trying to get you into? Say it. Christian culture, right? But on the other side, it feels like there's something pulling on us and pulling on us and pulling on us. How many of you know what I'm talking about when you just go online? Can you feel that pull sometimes when you go online? What are some of the things that can pull on you when you go online? Ads. Wow. Ads can just try to pull you off into all kinds of stuff, can't they? The pop-up stuff. Even if it's not like pornographic and things that, you know, overtly we can say, okay, there's a problem here with that. I shouldn't be looking at that. What are some of the other pulls that you can feel that are coming at you just constantly?
to buy things.
Buy this, buy this, buy this. Here's the other one. Be this, be this. Okay, rebellion. Now, I don't know if you guys have read this far in the book, but you know, when I was coming up, I was born in 1961, so how does that make me right now? Do the math real quick. I'm 53, okay? So I was born in 1961. I was born right as the time our nation was shifting through the 1960s. What happened in the 1960s? Studied 1960s in your history classes? Not just in the United States. You haven't studied the 1960s. Okay, that's something we'll need to work on. We'll be studying some of that in this class. But what happened in America in the 1960s? Who can give me some of the key words? What's that? Rebellion is a culture. In the 1960s, what happened? Let's go back a little bit. What happened in the 1940s? Everybody think of some big thing that happened in the 1940s.
World War II and
World War II. World War II comes through 1940s. You have to go back to 1930s and you get the Depression. So we're kind of looking in big picture eras. So in the 1940s we have World War II. After World War II, what happened in America in the 1950s? Does anybody know?
Cold War?
Well, the Cold War started, but what happened inside America in the 1950s? After we came through World War II, we came into a time of rapid growth in America. In fact, everybody was thinking that the world was getting very modern. So you guys want to just laugh about that now? I mean, we had TVs, baby, that were invented back then, okay? I mean, things were like modernizing, and there was a lot of growth that was coming through the 1950s until we got to the 1960s, and it was almost like we hit a brick wall, and people began to say, we need change around here. That's why you see in the 1960s the removal of prayer from the public school. You see Roe v. Wade. What was Roe v. Wade? Early 1960s, yes? Abortion became legalized. What else happened in the 1960s? It's a rapid time of change.
Wasn't alcohol illegal before then? But
No, that happened earlier. That was 1920s when it was when we took alcohol out and then had that come back in. But the 1960s we also had something called the Vietnam War. All heard about the Vietnam War? See, in the Vietnam War time was a war that was very unpopular in America, and there was a lot of, just like today, people are not happy about what's going on in Iraq, right? You guys following what's going on with this ISIS thing? And so a lot of people in the news today are saying, here's what I feel about this. I do not want a war. I do not want a war. Well, you know, how many would vote that? I don't want a war either. That's horrible. Who wants a war? Well, in the Vietnam War, there was a strong sense of we do not want to be in a war and we don't like what's going on over in Vietnam. And it stirred up a major kind of rebellion in our land. We also had the Beatles. You know who the Beatles are? Come on, the Beatles? You all know who the Beatles are?
yeah.
The invention of rock and roll came about at the same time. We saw a lot of changes. Now remember, we talked about culture. See, our music shifted, our ideas shifted, our laws shifted, the government began shifting, even the economic systems began shifting, and people's minds and their brains began changing ideas. It was called progressivism or liberalism began to move through our country until we ended up with people just having, have you ever heard of Woodstock? These guys need to know about this, don't they? They need to know about this history. Woodstock. Somebody needs to look that up for us. Somebody write that down, and next week come and define it, what year it was. I don't remember exactly what year Woodstock was, so we need to know that. But Woodstock was a major music festival. It was like a big defining mark of the 1960s. I think it was about 1965 or 6, but I could be wrong on that, so we're going to have to look that up. What happened is you had all these people show up for this big music, rock and roll, drugs, alcohol, sex. I mean, they just had a wild party. Somebody already looked it up. When was it?
1969.
1969. Okay, so look at there. We culminated through the 1960s with this big, it was like a giant, massive party. It was just massive. And the crazy thing is, I wasn't at Woodstock. I don't know anybody who was at Woodstock. But it's almost like Woodstock was an expression of what people wanted to do. They wanted to throw off all the old. Just get rid of all those old rules. Get rid of the old stuff. I'm going to be me. Okay, what does that sound like? Kind of sounds like rebellion, right? Kind of sounds like what the Bible talks about is rebellion. We saw that just come massively into our culture, and so a lot of people began to change. Now, my grandmama didn't go with Woodstock, I can just tell you, okay? My grandparents didn't shift, and you know what? My parents didn't shift. It wasn't like we all became hippies, and we all became, you know, like rock and roll freaks and started, you know, smoking dope or whatever. I mean, that didn't all happen to everybody, but you know what happens is when something begins to pull in a culture, it begins to pull the ideas along. And so sometimes if you're living in a culture, you can even not notice what's changing. Do you see how that could be? Because, you know, I was born in 1961. I didn't know until later, I thought rock and roll music had always been here. That's just how I thought about it. Because by the time I knew anything, there were already the Beatles, and all the, kind of the rock groups, and, I named all the ones that were around, you would think, who are these people? The Monkees? I mean, these, just silly stuff. We would have looked back and say, well, that's crazy. But guys, let me show you something. When you're born at a certain time, whatever's going on in the culture around you feels to you like it's normal. Does that make sense? Because like I'm sitting here telling you about the 1960s, I could go on to the 1970s. I really know more about the 1970s than the 60s because I was born in 61, so I was so little. I mean, we had wars going on, but I didn't care. I mean, I'm just playing in the sandbox sort of stuff. Who cares? But when you get to the 1970s, I came to be your age, and I began to notice more. But the problem is, whatever time you live, all you know is what you know. It's kind of deep, isn't it? It's like a deep moment there. But think about that. That's all you can know. Because you're raised in a certain time, so these thoughts come in. So where we got off on that trail is, I said, what's difficult about going online right now? If you don't know how to think about what you're experiencing, because see, when you go online, you're going with the community. You're going with the culture. Does that make sense? You don't see the people. It's almost more confusing because, who is Google? Do you know it? Mr. Google? You don't know. You interact with something. How many of you go online every day? Okay, how many of you go online multiple times a day? How many of you go online a lot? Okay? The whole worldview that we've shifted, it's almost like we've got a whole bunch of friends, but we don't know their names. Does that make sense? How many of you watch any kind of media? Like TV, sporting events, movies. Okay? All right? Each one of those people that produce that media, they had a worldview. They had a worldview. Now, statistically, what was their worldview going to be? Was it going to be a biblical worldview? No, it's going to be some other kind of worldview. But let me ask you, what was their worldview? Do you know? No. That's what we're going to study in this class. We're going to talk not only about this biblical worldview, that hopefully, even by the time you start this class, you're pretty familiar with those 6 points. Now, some of you might not be. So we'll be talking about how to strengthen that biblical worldview. But at the same time, if you're just going to sit there and you're going to interact with people online and you're going to have those things that come up that literally feel like they're just like trying to pull you someplace to believe something or to buy something or to be something, then we probably better figure out what the other worldviews are. Does that make sense? Because otherwise, how are you going to figure out what they're trying to sell you if you don't know where they're coming from? Yes? No? Everybody's kind of quiet. Does that make sense? All right, so we identified we're aiming our lives for the 1%. Now, I want to say this very clearly. I cannot make you aim your life for the 1%. Correct? Mm-hmm. Even though some of you are my biological children here in this house, in this room. I can't make you, Micah, aim your life for the 1%. It's impossible. All I can do is I can teach you, I can testify, I can pray, and I can train you. But who's going to aim their life for the 1%? Micah, or not? Did you know that's the case for each one of us in here? And so I don't want to go in through this class, and that's why we decided to start our worldview out like this. I don't want to go through all this worldview training so that you guys can successfully write out the 6 points. Okay, because you kind of already figure, okay, this lady's going to give me a test. Probably one of the first questions on the test is going to be, write the 6 points of the Barna worldview. That'd make a great test question, don't you think? So you want to write that down? She'll have that on the test, right? See that? But you know what? What good is that going to do you? I'm serious. What good is that going to do you? If you have not made a heart decision. Because let me ask you this. Do you think it is very likely that you will accidentally wind up in a 1% statistic at anything? Well, that kind of defies logic, doesn't it? If I said, oh yeah, probably most of you will be fine in that. No, obviously. If it's 1%, for instance, what percentage of basketball players in America make it to the NBA, do you think, of all basketball players in America?
0.25.
It couldn't even be 1%, could it? That's insane, because I know all of you. You're all basketball players, and I'm figuring that it's got to be. That would be a great study for somebody in here, wouldn't it? But you know what? We've got a lot of people who dream of getting to the NBA, even though we know that if they don't do something amazingly different, and if they don't have something born in them, then they're not going to make it to the NBA. Can we all settle that? Do we all know that, even though we can have fantasies about it? Now, here's what I want to show you. In this class, I can't make you become a biblical worldview person to live out your whole life. No human being can make another human being. And unless something is born in you, what would have to be born in you for you to be in the 1%? What would have to be born in you? Determination. It's good. But what's going to have to be born in you?
The Holy Spirit.
Thank you, the Holy Spirit. So there's going to have to be something real going on the inside of you. Because if there's not something real going on the inside, I seriously doubt that many of you are going to live your life, with a biblical worldview. Does that make sense? Because I know that when I go to the computer, the more I'm aware of this, and the more I interact with this stuff, I cannot even believe. I kind of think of it like this way. It's almost like there's a giant black hole. A black hole. What do I mean by a black hole? Scientifically, what is it? What is a black hole?
It's an extreme
Okay,
point
this is
of
the
gravity.
science guy back here, so he's probably going to really tell us. What is it?
It's an infinitely extreme point of gravity that sucks in everything, including light, which is why it's called black hole, because it's
Okay, so it's
dark.
okay, here's my non-very scientific, that's why I don't teach the science classes around here. Here's my non-scientific explanation of a black hole. It's a giant, black, thick thing of space that sucks everything. That's my scientific definition, okay? I even tried to go and research it. When I got done researching it, I almost felt like the researcher was saying that exact same thing. We don't know how it works. We just know this. It has this gravitational sort of a pull, even though it's not near a body in an Earth sort of sense, but it's something that pulls supernaturally. Now, here's what I want to warn you about. There is literally a war going on in the spirit realm right now for your soul. And it's almost like there's a black hole that's pulling from our culture right now. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Some of you are young enough in here, you haven't experienced it too much. Some of you who are a little bit older know exactly what I'm talking about, because you had this happen to you too. Precious young woman, came through our youth ministry, went on mission trips, was involved in teaching our Sunday school class, and then one Sunday she came to church and said, I've decided that I'm not going to come back, and here's the Sunday school book. And she walked out the door so she could go live with her boyfriend and live her life away from Jesus. And you're just over here saying, what just happened here? I don't understand. See, these statistics that we're talking about, they are not statistics. They're people. That make sense? Do you know what I'm talking about? So I don't want this class, this is our first class in here, I don't want this class just to hit your head. Because I have taught worldview, and the crazy thing is in this particular case of this young woman, I taught her some worldview. I'm pretty good at teaching worldview. I know enough, I don't know everything, but I know enough that I could teach you about it. But here's the problem. If it doesn't get down into your own heart, if there's no decision behind it, if you don't have like a personal encounter with God to where you say, that's what I want for my life, then you know what it's going to do? It's going to be kind of like algebra. How many of you really like algebra? Can I see? There's going to be some people here who really like algebra. That's good. I'm really glad you guys like algebra. Okay? Aren't you glad they like algebra? Okay? I'm glad somebody in America likes algebra. You've got to have somebody who likes it. Now, here's what I did with my algebra. I did it. I was a straight A student through algebra. But when I got done with algebra, you know what I did? I gave him the algebra book back, and I walked away from it. Okay? Because it was just a subject to me. Did you know you can do the same thing with your faith? You could even go to a worldview class. You could even have people teach you amazing stuff, but you can kind of get to the end of your school, close it up, and say, hey, I'm done with that. I don't have to go to class anymore. And you know what will happen to you? That's surely what's happening in this statistic, isn't it? Because I know that more than 1% of people were sitting in your chairs learning. So, next week, we're right at the end of the class. Next week, we're going to continue on in chapters 6 through 11. I want you to come to class next week able to do this. Are you ready? Get your pen out. Write this down. In the book, I defined this word open. You know, what I'm talking about in class right now is I'm going to try to give you some more background knowledge so that when you're reading the book, you're going to understand it even deeper. When you come next week, I want you to be able to define for me what the word open, like I'm using it in the book, means. Okay? Does everybody understand? I want you to be able to define it. Now, I'll warn you, I wrote the book. It's not as easy to define as what you think. But I can tell you, you're living in a world right now that has the highest value that you will be an open-minded and open-living person. Now, what do I mean by that? I want you to come back and be ready to tell me. Because that's what this cultural hole, this black hole, is going to try to pull you and trick you into believing. That if you really love God, you would be open. Can you hear the trickiness in that? If you really love people, you're not going to tell them they're wrong. That's mean. That's harsh. You call yourself a Christian? Has something to do with this word open. See, what the enemy's done is he's moved in here with a powerful, deluding deception. And that's what we're going to work on unmasking as we go through here. Okay, you starting to get it? So next week, you're reading chapters 6 through 11. We're going to talk about the side effects that happen to this open thing. But when we start the class, I want you to be ready to give me the understanding of open. All right, let's pray. Father, I thank you for this first class. I pray, Lord, that there would be a decision as we go